The shuttle bay doors hissed open with a mechanical groan that echoed through the vast chamber of Station Omega, revealing row upon row of sleek transport vessels from dozens of different worlds across the galaxy. Each craft bore the distinctive markings of their home systems, some elegant and flowing like the silver vessels of the Altarians, others geometric and precise like the angular ships of the Centaurians. Alex Reed stepped onto the polished metal floor, his boots making a sharp, clicking sound that seemed oddly out of place among the soft padding worn by most other species. The human carried a simple duffel bag over his shoulder, its worn fabric and patched corners telling stories of a world where nothing came easy, and everything had to last. Around him, the newest batch of cadets from across known space gathered, in loose groups, their conversations creating a symphony of different languages and vocal patterns that would have been overwhelming to most beings. The Altarians moved with fluid grace, their translucent skin shimmering under the artificial lighting as they glided rather than walked. Their voices carried musical tones that made even casual conversation sound like poetry. The Centaurian cadets stood in perfect formation, their metallic implants gleaming as they processed information through direct neural interfaces. They communicated through rapid data bursts that appeared as holographic displays above their heads, sharing tactical assessments and probability calculations about their new environment. Near the far wall, a group of Veloxians chittered excitedly among themselves, their insectoid features animated with enthusiasm as they discussed the advanced training programs they would soon experience. Their compound eyes tracked multiple conversations simultaneously, while their mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among their species. But it was the whispers that caught Alex's attention most, the soft murmurs that seemed to follow him wherever he walked, pointing fingers that tried to be discreet but failed miserably, and the way conversations stopped whenever he approached a group of cadets. "Is that really one of them?" came a hushed voice from somewhere behind him. "A human from that death world?" "Earth, I think it's called," another voice responded, this one belonging to a tall Rigelian whose blue-tinted skin seemed to pale slightly. "Class 12 designation. Can you imagine living on such a violent planet?" "I heard they fight wars over liquid water," whispered a third voice. "And they actually consume other living creatures for sustenance. How barbaric." Alex pretended not to hear these comments, though his enhanced hearing picked up every word. With crystal clarity, instead, he focused on studying the layout of the station, noting exit points, security measures, and potential defensive positions, habits ingrained from growing up on a world where such awareness often meant the difference between life and death. The Academy's main corridor stretched ahead like a metallic canyon, its walls lined with portraits of distinguished graduates from countless species who had gone on to serve in the Galactic Defense Force. Their achievements were listed in flowing script beneath each image. Diplomatic victories, scientific breakthroughs, and military campaigns that had shaped the course of galactic history. As the group of new cadets moved through the corridor, Alex noticed how the other species naturally clustered together by homeworld origin. The Altarians formed elegant flowing patterns as they walked, while the Centaurians maintained precise, geometric formations. Even species he didn't recognize seemed to find their own kind instinctively. He walked alone. The isolation wasn't entirely unwelcome, though. It gave him space to observe and learn, to study the behavioral patterns of species he had only read about in Earth's limited databases. Every gesture, every social interaction, every display of natural ability was information that might prove valuable later. The Academy's architecture reflected the peaceful nature of most galactic civilizations, with flowing curves and open spaces. Designed to promote harmony and cooperation, soft lighting created an atmosphere of calm learning, while the gentle hum of environmental systems provided a soothing background that was meant to reduce stress and anxiety. To Alex, it felt uncomfortably exposed. Too many blind corners, too many potential ambush points, and far too many ways for someone to approach without being detected. His instincts, honed by evolution on a world where predators could strike from any direction, kept him in a constant state of low-level alertness that the peaceful environment couldn't diminish. "Attention, cadets," came a voice over the station's communication system. The announcement was delivered simultaneously in dozens of languages, each translation perfectly synchronized. Please report to Assembly Hall 7 for orientation and instructor assignments. The crowd of new arrivals began moving in that direction, their excitement palpable as they anticipated meeting their training officers and beginning their journey toward becoming officers in the Galactic Defense Force. For most of them, this represented the culmination of years of study and preparation. On worlds where military service was considered an honor reserved for the finest members of their species, as they entered the massive assembly hall, Alex couldn't help but notice the two figures standing at the front of the room on the raised platform. Both were clearly instructors based on their formal uniforms and the way they carried themselves, with practiced authority. The first was Captain Talos, a being whose crystalline structure caught and refracted the room's lighting into beautiful rainbow patterns across the walls. His species, the Zilithians, were known for their analytical minds and their ability to process multiple complex calculations simultaneously. Their crystal-based physiology made them nearly indestructible by most galactic standards, and their logical approach to problem-solving had made them highly valued as military tacticians. Beside him stood Commander Nix, whose amphibious features marked him as one of the Aquari from the ocean worlds of the Outer Rim. His sleek, streamlined body spoke of a species adapted for both aquatic and terrestrial environments, while his large eyes suggested enhanced visual capabilities that most land-based species lacked. The Aquari were renowned for their speed and agility, making them excellent scouts and reconnaissance specialists. Both instructors surveyed the assembled cadets with expressions that seemed to catalog and categorize each individual. Their eyes moved from group to group, assessing the various species and their likely capabilities. When their gaze reached Alex, however, something shifted in their demeanor. Captain Talos's crystalline features arranged themselves into what might have been a smile on a more conventional face, though the expression carried undertones that suggested amusement rather than welcome. Commander Nix's large eyes narrowed slightly, and his head tilted in a gesture that seemed almost predatory. "Welcome to the Galactic Military Academy," Captain Talos announced, his voice carrying the harmonic resonance typical of his species. "You represent the finest examples of your respective civilizations, selected for your potential to serve as officers in the Defense Force. Over the coming months," Commander Nix continued, his words flowing like water over smooth stones, "you will be tested, trained, and transformed from civilian citizens into military leaders. The galaxy depends on your success." As the two instructors continued their welcoming remarks, Alex noticed how their attention kept returning to him. Their glances carried a weight that suggested they had already formed opinions about the human cadet before any training had even begun. The orientation continued with practical matters, room assignments, meal schedules, and initial training rotations. Alex learned that he had been assigned to Combat Training Group Alpha, which would be under the direct supervision of Captain Talos and Commander Nix. As the cadets began filing out of the assembly hall to locate their quarters, Alex heard Captain Talos speaking quietly to his colleague. "So that's the Deathworlder specimen," the crystalline being said, his harmonic voice carrying just loud enough for enhanced human hearing to detect. "Hardly looks like the monster the report suggested." Commander Nix's response was equally quiet, but no less audible to Alex's enhanced senses. "Primitive species often appear deceptively harmless," he said, "until you realize they're nothing more than barely evolved predators." Alex continued walking as if he hadn't heard anything, but he filed the information away for future reference. It seemed his time at the academy was going to be more challenging than he had initially anticipated, though perhaps not in the ways the instructors expected. 3 weeks into his training at the academy, Alex had grown accustomed to the routine of early morning physical conditioning, followed by tactical studies, weapons training, and combat simulations. The other cadets had settled into their own patterns, forming study groups and friendships based on shared experiences from similar worlds. The combat simulation chamber hummed with energy as Combat Training Group Alpha assembled for their daily session. Holographic projectors lined the walls and ceiling, capable of creating realistic battlefield scenarios that could challenge cadets from any species. The room could simulate everything from the methane storms of Titan Prime to the crystal caves of Vega 7, adjusting gravity, atmosphere, and environmental hazards to match any conceivable combat situation. "Today we will be studying proper Combat forms as developed by civilized military doctrine, Captain Talos announced, his crystalline form catching the light from the simulation projectors. These techniques have been refined over thousands of years by the greatest military minds in galactic history. Commander Nix stepped forward, his amphibious features arranged in what passed for a professional expression, though there was something else lurking beneath the surface. We will demonstrate the fundamental principles that separate trained soldiers from... He paused, his large eyes finding Alex in the group, from primitive brawlers who rely on instinct and aggression. The other cadets shifted uncomfortably at the obvious reference. Several Altarian cadets exchanged glances, their translucent features showing concern at the breach of Academy protocol regarding species discrimination. The Centaurian cadets simply processed the information through their neural interfaces, adding it to their growing databases about interpersonal dynamics. Alex remained perfectly still, his expression neutral as he watched the instructors begin. Their demonstration, years of surviving on Earth, had taught him when to react and when to observe. And right now, observation was the better choice. Observe the Zilithian combat methodology, Captain Talos said as he moved through a series of precise, calculated movements. Each motion was perfectly balanced, mathematically optimal for force, distribution, and energy conservation. Every strike is calculated for maximum efficiency with minimum effort. This is what separates civilized warfare from the chaotic flailing of lesser species. The demonstration was impressive by any standard. The crystalline being's movements flowed like a complex equation made physical, each technique building upon the last in a sequence that spoke of centuries of refinement and intellectual development. Commander Nix then took the floor, his form shifting into combat readiness with fluid grace. The Aquari fighting style emphasizes adaptability and flow, he explained, moving through techniques that seem to bend the laws of physics. We adapt to our opponent's movements like water, flowing around obstacles, always finding the path of least resistance to victory. His demonstration showcased incredible speed and flexibility, movements that would have been impossible for most terrestrial species. The way he seemed to flow from one position to another without transitional movements drew appreciative murmurs from several cadets. These are the products of advanced civilization, Captain Talos resumed his lecture. Techniques developed through careful study, scientific analysis, and intellectual refinement. They represent the pinnacle of military evolution. Unlike, Commander Nix added, his gaze once again finding Alex, the crude methods employed by species that never progressed beyond their primitive origins. Indeed, Captain Talos agreed, some species never learn to move beyond their base animal instincts. They swing their appendages wildly, hoping that brute force and savage aggression might overcome superior technique and intelligence. A few cadets glanced nervously toward Alex, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the instruction was taking. The Altarians seemed particularly distressed as their culture valued harmony and respect for all life forms. Even the typically stoic Centaurians were processing elevated stress indicators in their neural displays. "Tell us, Cadet Reed, Commander," Nix called out, using Alex's surname with a pronunciation that somehow made it sound primitive and crude. "What fighting techniques does your species employ on your homeworld?" Alex considered his response carefully. "We adapt our methods to the situation and the opponent," he replied evenly. "Flexibility and improvisation are valued over rigid adherence to predetermined forms." Captain Talos's crystalline features arranged themselves into what might have been amusement. "Ah yes, improvisation," he said, his harmonic voice carrying tones of mockery. "The last refuge of species that lack the intellectual capacity for proper planning and technique development. Improvisation is simply another word for making it up as you go along," Commander Nix added. "It's what primitive minds do when they can't comprehend proper strategic thinking." The other instructors began demonstrating various combat scenarios, each one designed to showcase the sophisticated techniques of their respective species while pointedly ignoring human military history or tactics. They spoke of elegant Altarian defensive patterns, precise Centaurian combat algorithms, and fluid Aquari adaptive strategies. "You see," Captain Talos explained to the assembled cadets, "each civilized species has contributed unique elements to galactic military doctrine, The Altarians gave us harmony and balance. The Centaurians provided mathematical precision. The Aquari contributed adaptability and flow. And what has humanity contributed? Commander Nix asked rhetorically. Chaos, brutality, and the kind of mindless aggression that belongs in a primitive jungle, not on a modern battlefield. Alex watched as several cadets began to look genuinely uncomfortable with the increasingly hostile tone of the instruction. A few Altarians whispered among themselves in their musical language, while some of the other species seemed to be reconsidering their initial assumptions about the human in their group. The simulation began with a standard urban combat scenario. The holographic environment materialized around them, creating a detailed cityscape complete with civilians, hostile forces, and complex tactical challenges. Each cadet was assigned a specific role and objective. Cadet Reed, Captain Talos announced, "You will play the role of hostile forces. This should suit your species' natural inclinations perfectly." The scenario that followed was clearly designed to make Alex fail. He was outnumbered 3-1, given inferior equipment, and placed in tactical situations that would have challenged even experienced soldiers. Meanwhile, the other cadets were provided with advanced weaponry, superior positioning, and detailed intelligence about his expected movements. Despite the impossible odds, Alex managed to achieve several tactical victories through unconventional methods that the simulation hadn't anticipated. He used environmental elements in ways the program hadn't been designed to recognize, employed psychological tactics that confused his opponents, and demonstrated a level of spatial awareness that surprised even himself. Lucky breaks. Commander Nix dismissed his successes. Random chance occasionally favors even the most primitive approaches. Indeed, Captain Talos agreed. Proper military doctrine doesn't rely on luck or coincidence. It relies on proven methodology and superior training. As the training session concluded, Alex noticed several cadets approaching him with expressions of concern and curiosity. The Altarians seemed particularly interested in understanding the techniques he had employed, while some Centaurian cadets were running analysis programs on their neural interfaces. But before any meaningful conversations could develop, Commander Nix interrupted. "Cadets are reminded that fraternizing with disciplinary problems is not encouraged," he announced. "Maintaining proper standards requires avoiding association with elements that might lower overall performance levels." The implied threat was clear enough that most cadets reluctantly moved away, though Alex could see that several were clearly troubled by what they were witnessing. As the group dispersed, Captain Talos approached Alex directly. "I trust you understand your position here, Cadet Reed," he said, his harmonic voice carrying undertones that suggested this was more than casual conversation. "This academy trains future leaders of the Galactic Defense Force, not primitive warriors from backwater deathworlds. Your species was admitted as a political courtesy," Commander Nix added, "a gesture of inclusivity that some of us questioned from the beginning. Don't mistake tolerance for acceptance." Alex remained silent, meeting their gazes steadily without showing any reaction to their words. Inside, however, he was cataloging everything: their body language, their psychological tactics, their assumptions about human capabilities. All of it was information that might prove useful later. "I suggest you focus on trying to keep up with your betters," Captain Talos concluded, "though I suspect that may prove beyond your capabilities." As the instructors departed, Alex was left alone in the simulation chamber. The holographic environment had shut down, leaving him surrounded by bare walls and the quiet hum of dormant machinery. He used the solitude to practice some basic movement patterns, not the primitive brawling his instructors expected, but the refined combat techniques that Earth's military had developed through centuries of warfare. What his instructors didn't understand was that humanity's primitive origins had forced them to develop something that peaceful civilizations had never needed: the ability to adapt, survive, and overcome impossible odds through sheer determination and innovative thinking. 8 weeks had passed since Alex's arrival at the academy, and what had begun as casual dismissal from his instructors had evolved into systematic harassment. Every training session brought new humiliations, each one more carefully crafted than the last to highlight what Captain Talos and Commander Nix saw as fundamental human inadequacies. The mess hall buzzed with its usual collection of conversations in dozens of languages, as cadets from across The galaxy shared meals and experiences. Alex sat at a table near the large viewing ports that offered a spectacular view of the nebula surrounding Station Omega, eating the nutrient paste that served as standard Academy food while reviewing tactical manuals on his datapad. "Look at it trying to read," came a familiar harmonic voice from across the hall. Captain Talos's words carried clearly through the dining area. "I suppose even primitive species can be trained to recognize basic symbols." Commander Nix's flowing laughter followed. "Though I wonder if it actually comprehends the concepts, or if it's simply mimicking the behavior of actual students." Several cadets at nearby tables stopped eating, their discomfort obvious as they witnessed another public humiliation. The Altarian cadets looked particularly distressed, their translucent features showing the emotional turmoil that their peaceful nature found difficult to process. Alex continued reading without acknowledging the comments, though he noticed how the words "it" and "creature" had replaced any use of his name or even basic personal pronouns. This dehumanization was a classic psychological warfare technique, designed to reduce him to something less than a person in the minds of observers. "Perhaps we should implement a remedial program," Captain Talos suggested loudly enough for half the dining hall to hear. "Something more appropriate for a species that hasn't yet developed abstract reasoning capabilities." "Excellent idea," Commander Nix replied. "We could start with basic pattern recognition and work up to simple tool use, assuming it can manage even that level of complexity." The conversations around Alex had stopped entirely now. Every cadet in the immediate area was watching to see how he would respond to this latest provocation. Some looked sympathetic, others appeared curious about human emotional responses, while a few seemed genuinely angry at the instructor's behavior. But Alex simply turned the page of his manual and continued reading. His apparent lack of reaction seemed to frustrate his tormentors, who had clearly expected some kind of emotional outburst they could use to justify further disciplinary action. The harassment wasn't limited to verbal abuse, however. During physical training sessions, Alex found himself assigned to equipment that mysteriously malfunctioned at critical moments. In tactical exercises, he was consistently given incomplete information, while other cadets received full briefings. His quarters were subjected to random inspections that somehow never found violations among other cadets. The breaking point came during a military history lecture. Captain Talos was discussing famous defensive actions throughout galactic history, highlighting the strategic brilliance of various civilized species and their contributions to modern warfare doctrine. "The Battle of Sigma Centauri demonstrated the intellectual superiority of coordinated defense," he explained, showing holographic displays of fleet movements and tactical decisions. Commander Velthera's use of gravitational mathematics to predict enemy movements saved countless lives and preserved the colony. The Siege of Altair Prime showcased the importance of harmony between multiple species working as one. Commander Nix added, "When civilized minds collaborate, they can overcome seemingly impossible odds through cooperation and mutual respect." The lecture continued with example after example of military victories achieved through intelligence, cooperation, and advanced tactical thinking. Each case study reinforced the narrative that successful warfare required the kind of sophisticated reasoning that only advanced civilizations possessed. "Of course," Captain Talos said, his crystalline features catching the light as he turned toward Alex. "Not every species has contributed meaningfully to military science. Some worlds produce nothing but expendable cannon fodder, creatures useful only for absorbing enemy fire while actual soldiers implement real strategies." "Indeed," Commander Nix agreed. "Some species seem genetically incapable of understanding anything beyond basic aggression. They charge forward mindlessly, hoping that primitive fury might somehow overcome superior tactics and training." Alex felt something cold settle in his chest, but he maintained his neutral expression while accessing his datapad to pull up information about human military history. The database contained extensive records of Earth's conflicts, from ancient battles to the most recent planetary defense campaigns. "Genetic dead ends," Captain Talos continued. "Species that reached their evolutionary peak in some primordial jungle and never developed beyond that point. They're like living fossils, remnants of a more brutal time that civilized beings have thankfully moved beyond." The tragedy, Commander Nix added with mock sympathy, is that they don't seem to understand their own limitations. They actually believe they belong among true warriors, when in reality they're nothing more than expendable resources to be used up and discarded. Several cadets were now openly staring at Alex, waiting to see if this latest escalation would finally provoke a reaction. The Altarians looked deeply troubled, while some of the Centaurian cadets were running stress analysis programs that were probably detecting elevated tension levels throughout the room. But the comment that finally crossed the line came when Captain Talos began discussing casualty statistics from recent conflicts. Human forces, he said with audible disdain, consistently suffer the highest losses in any engagement, not because they face more dangerous opponents, but because their primitive tactics and inability to think strategically leads them into unnecessary casualties. They're useful in that regard, Commander Nix added. Better to lose expendable savages than actual soldiers. Their deaths, at least, serve some purpose by preserving the lives of beings capable of contributing meaningfully to galactic civilization. Cannon fodder, Captain Talos agreed. Nothing more than biological weapons that throw themselves at the enemy until superior beings can implement actual solutions. It's almost merciful, really, giving their meaningless existence some small purpose before they're inevitably discarded. Alex's datapad cracked under the sudden pressure of his grip, the sound sharp enough to draw attention from across the room. For the first time since arriving at the academy, his carefully maintained composure showed signs of strain. The instructors noticed immediately, and their expressions shifted to something resembling satisfaction. They had finally found the pressure point that could provoke an emotional response from their target. "Oh dear," Captain Talos said with mock concern. "I hope we haven't damaged Academy property, though I suppose we shouldn't expect a primitive species to understand proper equipment handling. Perhaps it should be assigned to manual labor, Commander," Nix suggested. "Something more appropriate for creatures that can't control their destructive impulses." Alex stood slowly, his movements controlled but carrying an intensity that hadn't been present before. Every cadet in the lecture hall was now watching, and several instructors from other groups had paused their own activities to observe the developing situation. "Is there something you'd like to say, Cadet Reed?" Captain Talos asked, his harmonic voice carrying tones of anticipation. "Some primitive grunt or growl that represents the pinnacle of human communication?" Alex looked directly at both instructors for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and level. "I formally request a demonstration bout," he said clearly. "Academy Regulations Section 47 allows cadets to challenge instructors to practical demonstrations when they believe their species' capabilities have been misrepresented in classroom instruction." The silence that followed was complete. No one had expected this response, and the legal implications were immediately clear to anyone familiar with Academy procedures. Captain Talos's crystalline features shifted through several configurations before settling into what might have been surprise. "You're challenging us to a combat demonstration." "Both of you," Alex clarified. "Simultaneously, Academy regulations specify that instructors who make claims about comparative species capabilities must be prepared to demonstrate their assertions through practical application." Commander Nix's large eyes widened, and his amphibious features showed genuine surprise. "You want to fight both of us at the same time?" "I want to demonstrate human military capabilities," Alex replied. "Since you've spent months claiming that civilized species are inherently superior in combat situations, this seems like an excellent opportunity to prove your theories." The legal framework was solid. Several cadets were already pulling up the relevant regulations on their datapads, confirming that Alex's request fell within established Academy procedures. More importantly, refusing the challenge would be seen as an admission that their claims about human inferiority might not be accurate. Captain Talos exchanged a glance with Commander Nix, and both instructors' expressions shifted to something resembling predatory satisfaction. "Very well, Captain," Talos announced. "We accept your challenge. This will serve as an excellent educational opportunity for all cadets to observe the difference between primitive aggression and civilized combat technique." "Indeed," Commander Nix agreed. 7 days from now, Assembly Hall 7, Full academy. Attendance. Will ensure that everyone witnesses exactly what happens when a Deathworlder's delusions meet reality. News of the upcoming demonstration spread through Station Omega like wildfire. Within hours of Alex's formal challenge being accepted, every cadet, instructor, and administrative staff member knew about the unprecedented event. The Academy's communication networks buzzed with speculation, analysis, and betting odds as the entire station prepared for what promised to be either a spectacular victory for civilized military doctrine or the most shocking upset in Academy history. Alex spent the 7-day preparation period in careful observation and study. He attended regular classes as normal, maintaining his routine while quietly gathering intelligence about his opponent's fighting styles, capabilities, and potential weaknesses. The Academy's extensive database provided detailed information about Zilithian and Aquari physiology, combat techniques, and psychological profiles. Meanwhile, Captain Talos and Commander Nix seemed to be treating the upcoming demonstration as entertainment rather than a serious challenge. They held impromptu training sessions in public areas, showcasing their abilities for gathered crowds of cadets and instructors who cheered their demonstrations with enthusiasm. The key to defeating primitive opponents, Captain Talos explained. During one such session, his crystalline form moving through complex combat sequences is to remain calm and analytical while they exhaust themselves through emotional outbursts and wasted energy. Exactly, Commander Nix agreed, flowing through techniques that demonstrated his species' incredible speed and flexibility. Let them charge forward with their crude aggression, then use superior technique to redirect their momentum against them. The crowds that gathered for these exhibitions grew larger each day, with faculty members from across the station coming to observe and offer advice. Several senior instructors shared stories of previous encounters with Deathworlder species, describing them as dangerous but ultimately predictable opponents who relied on intimidation rather than skill. I served in the Outer Rim campaigns. One elderly Centaurian professor told a group of fascinated cadets, "The key is not to be impressed by their posturing and aggressive displays. Underneath all that primitive fury, they're just frightened animals trying to survive in situations they don't understand. The psychological aspect is crucial," added a distinguished Altarian instructor. "They expect opponents to be intimidated by their savage behavior. Once you demonstrate that civilized discipline can't be shaken by barbaric theatrics, they become confused and vulnerable." Betting pools had emerged throughout the station, with odds heavily favoring the instructors. Most estimates suggested the demonstration would last between 10 and 15 seconds, with a few optimistic outliers proposing it might reach 30 seconds if Alex managed to avoid immediate defeat through running or defensive positioning. The engineering corps had placed bets on whether the human would attempt to use makeshift weapons, while the medical division was wagering on the types and severity of injuries they expected to treat afterward. Even the civilian support staff had gotten involved, creating elaborate probability matrices based on species physiological data and combat performance statistics. Dr. Yuki Sato, the Academy's chief medical officer, and one of only 3 humans on the station's permanent staff, made it clear through official channels that she would not participate in any betting related to the demonstration. However, several cadets noticed that she had quietly arranged for additional trauma treatment equipment to be prepared, and that she had cleared her schedule completely for the day of the event. The Academy's Combat Analysis Department took the opportunity to set up recording equipment throughout Assembly Hall 7, planning to use the demonstration as a teaching tool for future classes on tactical assessment and species-specific combat doctrines. Several professors announced that they would be assigning papers analyzing the encounter from various academic perspectives. "This will provide excellent data for our ongoing research into Deathworlder psychology," announced Professor Keg from the Behavioral Sciences Division. "We rarely get opportunities to observe primitive combat responses under controlled conditions." Alex learned about these preparations through casual conversations and overheard discussions, but he showed no visible reaction to the growing spectacle surrounding his challenge. Instead, he continued his quiet preparation routine, studying Academy layouts, reviewing combat regulations, and practicing basic movement patterns in the privacy of his quarters. His fellow cadets had mixed reactions to the approaching demonstration. The Altarians remained deeply troubled by the entire situation, viewing it as a violation of the harmony they believed should exist between all sentient beings. Several had approached Academy administrators requesting that the event be cancelled or postponed. The Centaurian cadets approached the situation with their typical analytical detachment, running computer models and probability assessments that consistently predicted Alex's defeat. However, a few had begun questioning why someone would willingly enter a situation with such overwhelming odds against success. The mathematical certainty of his defeat suggests either severe psychological dysfunction or access to information not available to our analysis, one Centaurian cadet observed. Humans from Deathworlds might possess capabilities not documented in standard databases. The various other species represented at the Academy showed a range of responses from excited anticipation to uncomfortable concern. Some viewed the demonstration as an opportunity to see legendary instructors display their renowned skills, while others worried that the event had taken on an unseemly carnival atmosphere that reflected poorly on the Academy's educational mission. Academy Commander Helen Davis found herself in an increasingly difficult position as the demonstration approached. As the station's commanding officer, she was required to oversee the event and ensure it remained within Academy regulations. However, she was also one of the few senior staff members with extensive experience in Outer Rim conflicts, where human forces had served with distinction. Her official position was one of strict neutrality, but several staff members noticed that she had been spending considerable time reviewing personnel files and incident reports from previous human military engagements. She also quietly arranged for additional security personnel to be present during the demonstration, citing concerns about crowd control and safety protocols. This is an educational demonstration between qualified military instructors and an Academy cadet, she announced during a staff meeting. It will be conducted according to established regulations with appropriate safety measures in place. However, her private conversations with Dr. Sato and other senior staff suggested that she was considerably more concerned about the potential outcomes than her public statements indicated. The 3 days leading up to the demonstration saw increasing tension. Throughout the station, regular classes continued, but most conversations eventually turned to speculation about the upcoming event. Study groups dissolved into impromptu discussion sessions about combat theory and species capabilities. Captain Talos and Commander Nix seemed to be enjoying the attention immensely. They held court each evening in the officers' lounge, entertaining colleagues with stories about previous encounters with primitive species and demonstrating techniques they plan to use during the demonstration. The key is psychological dominance, Captain Talos explained to a gathered crowd of instructors. Make them understand immediately that they're facing superior opponents, and their primitive conditioning will cause them to either freeze in terror or charge forward blindly. I've found that displaying superior speed and agility early in an encounter breaks their confidence completely, Commander Nix added. They expect to have physical advantages, so demonstrating that civilized species can surpass them in every category leaves them psychologically defeated before the real combat even begins. Their confidence was infectious, spreading throughout the instructor corps and reinforcing the general consensus that the demonstration would serve as a definitive proof of civilized military superiority. Faculty members began planning follow-up lectures based on the expected outcome, while several academic journals requested permission to document the event for future publication. Alex maintained his routine throughout this period, attending classes, completing assignments, and showing no outward signs of stress or concern. However, those who knew what to look for might have noticed subtle changes in his behavior patterns. His movements had become more economical, his awareness more focused, and his interactions more deliberately controlled. On the evening before the demonstration, he received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Sato appeared at his quarters with a medical kit and a concerned expression that she tried unsuccessfully to hide behind professional detachment. I wanted to conduct a pre-event medical assessment, she said. Though they both knew this wasn't standard procedure for training demonstrations. Make sure you're in optimal physical condition for tomorrow. During the examination, she spoke quietly about the medical facilities available on the station and the trauma treatment protocols that would be immediately available if needed. She also mentioned, almost casually, that emergency transport to more advanced medical facilities could be arranged within minutes if circumstances required such measures. Is there anything you'd like me to know about human physiology that might not be in the standard databases? She asked during the final stages of the examination. Any capabilities or limitations that might be relevant for medical treatment? Alex considered her question carefully before responding. Humans are more resilient than most databases suggest. He said simply, "We've had to be." As dawn approached on the day of the demonstration, Station Omega buzzed with an energy that was part excitement, part anxiety, and part historical anticipation. Cadets lined up hours early for seats in Assembly Hall 7, while instructors made final preparations for what many believed would become a defining moment in Academy history. The combat arena had been configured to Academy standard specifications, a circular platform 50 meters in diameter, surrounded by energy barriers designed to contain the action, while allowing clear observation from all angles. Medical teams positioned themselves at strategic points around the perimeter, their equipment ready for immediate deployment. Alex arrived at the designated time wearing standard Academy training gear, his expression calm and focused as he surveyed the assembled crowd. The hall was packed beyond capacity, with standing room only for late arrivals and additional viewing screens set up throughout the station for those who couldn't physically attend. Captain Talos and Commander Nix entered to enthusiastic applause from their colleagues and supporters, both instructors acknowledging the crowd with confident gestures before taking their positions on the combat platform. Their body language radiated certainty and professional competence. Academy Commander Davis stepped forward to formally oversee the demonstration, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's amplification system as she reviewed the rules and safety protocols that would govern the encounter. This demonstration will continue until one party yields, becomes unable to continue, or I determine that safety requires intervention, she announced. Standard Academy regulations regarding excessive force and permanent injury remain in effect. The crowd settled into expectant silence as the three participants took their positions. Captain Talos and Commander Nix moved with practiced coordination, positioning themselves to take advantage of their numerical superiority while maintaining optimal spacing for their respective combat styles. Alex stood alone in the center of the platform, his posture relaxed but alert as he studied his opponents and calculated distances, angles, and potential tactical options. The moment stretched as hundreds of spectators held their breath, waiting for the signal that would begin what most expected to be a very brief and decisive encounter. Participants, ready? Commander Davis called out, receiving confirmatory gestures from all three combatants. Demonstration begins in 3, 2, 1, commence. The word commence had barely finished echoing through Assembly Hall 7 when the demonstration exploded into motion, but not in the way anyone had expected. Captain Talos and Commander Nix began their approach with the confident coordination of experienced instructors demonstrating superior technique to an audience of students. They moved with practiced precision, their spacing perfect for mutual support while avoiding interference with each other's combat styles. Alex didn't charge forward with primitive fury as predicted. Instead, he seemed to simply disappear. The human's first movement was so unexpected that several spectators later claimed they had missed it entirely, rather than engaging either opponent. Directly, Alex dove toward the platform's edge, his body moving with a fluid economy that spoke of training far beyond what anyone had assumed possible. Captain Talos, expecting a frontal assault, found himself striking empty air as Alex rolled beneath his crystalline guard. The Zilithian's mathematically perfect combat form suddenly seemed ponderous and predictable when faced with an opponent who refused to follow expected patterns. But Alex wasn't running or avoiding combat. He was repositioning. As he came out of his roll, Alex's hand found a piece of decorative metalwork from the platform's edge, a small section that had been loosened during the arena's preparation. His movement incorporated the improvised weapon so smoothly that observers initially thought it was part of the platform's design. Commander Nix, flowing forward with a quarry grace to intercept what he assumed would be a retreat, instead found himself facing an opponent who had already adapted to the environment in ways the simulation programs had never anticipated. The piece of metal, roughly the size of a dinner plate and weighing perhaps 2 kilograms, became a projectile, that crossed the space between Alex and Commander Nix in a trajectory that the Aquari's enhanced reflexes could track, but not avoid. The impact struck the amphibious instructor in his center of mass with enough force to disrupt his balance and breathing, but Alex was already moving again before the makeshift weapon had even completed its flight. Captain Talos, recovering from his missed strike, turned to engage the human who should have been trapped between two superior opponents. Instead, he found Alex moving toward him with a speed and intensity that seemed to violate everything they thought they knew about human capabilities. But this wasn't the mindless charge of a primitive predator. Every movement had purpose, every step was calculated, and every decision was being made and executed faster than the crystalline being's analytical mind could process. Alex's approach forced Captain Talos to defend against what appeared to be a direct assault. The Zilithian's combat training kicked in automatically, his body shifting into defensive configurations that had been perfected over centuries of military development. The human's attack never came. Instead, Alex used Captain Talos's defensive positioning as a fulcrum, planting one hand on the instructor's crystalline shoulder and vaulting over him in a movement that redirected his momentum toward Commander Nix, who was still recovering from the improvised projectile impact. The maneuver left both instructors facing away from their opponent for a critical fraction of a second, and Alex had positioned himself perfectly to exploit the opening. Commander Nix, his large eyes tracking movement with enhanced visual acuity, saw the human approaching and prepared to demonstrate the superior speed and agility that made Aquari such formidable opponents. His body began flowing into an evasive pattern that should have carried him safely away from any conceivable threat. Alex's foot connected with the platform surface at exactly the right angle to launch himself not where Commander Nix was, but where the Aquari's evasion pattern would take him. The human's trajectory intersected with his opponent's attempted escape route with mathematical precision that would have impressed the Centaurian cadets. The collision sent Commander Nix sprawling across the platform, his streamlined form impacting the energy barriers with enough force to activate the containment system's safety protocols. Emergency medical indicators began flashing as sensors detected impacts beyond normal training parameters. Captain Talos, realizing that his opponent had somehow eliminated half of their numerical advantage in less than 4 seconds, abandoned careful technique in favor of raw aggression. His crystalline form blazed with reflected light as he launched himself toward the human with enough force to shatter most organic opponents. Alex moved to meet the charge head-on, but his approach defied every principle of physics and tactics that the assembled observers understood. Instead of trying to avoid or deflect the massive crystalline being's attack, the human seemed to accelerate directly into it. The moment of contact lasted for perhaps half a second, but to those watching, it seemed to stretch into an eternity of impossible physics. Alex's smaller form should have been crushed by the impact. Instead, he seemed to flow around Captain Talos's attack like water around a stone, redirecting the instructor's momentum and adding his own force to the equation. The result was catastrophic for the Zilithian. Captain Talos found himself airborne, his crystalline body following a trajectory that would terminate in the platform's surface with devastating force. His analytical mind had just enough time to calculate the impact parameters before physics took over. The sound of crystalline structure meeting reinforced platform material echoed through the assembly hall, like breaking glass magnified 1,000 times. Captain Talos lay motionless, his normally prismatic form now showing fracture patterns that sparkled with dangerous beauty under the arena lighting. Alex landed in a controlled crouch, his breathing slightly elevated but otherwise showing no signs of distress. Around him, 2 of the Academy's most respected instructors lay incapacitated, their defeat so complete and unexpected that the assembled crowd sat in stunned silence. The entire demonstration had lasted exactly 7 seconds. Commander Davis's voice cut through the silence as she activated the medical emergency protocols. "Medical teams to the platform immediately," she commanded. Though the trauma specialists were already moving toward the fallen instructors, Alex stood slowly, his posture relaxed but alert as he surveyed the arena. His eyes found Commander Davis and he nodded once, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both respect for authority and confirmation that the demonstration was concluded. Dr. Sato was among the first medical personnel to reach the platform. her scanner already active as she began assessing the condition of both instructors. Commander Nix was conscious but showed signs of severe impact trauma and possible internal injuries. Captain Talos remained unconscious, his crystalline structure displaying fracture patterns that would require extensive medical intervention. Both instructors require immediate medical attention, Dr. Sato announced. Commander Nix has multiple fractures and possible internal bleeding. Captain Talos shows critical structural damage to his crystalline matrix. The medical teams worked with practiced efficiency to stabilize both patients for transport to the Academy's advanced treatment facilities. Specialized equipment designed for treating injured Zelithians and Aquari had been prepared in advance, though no one had expected it would actually be needed. As the medical teams departed with their patients, the assembly hall remained locked. In stunned silence, hundreds of cadets and instructors sat motionless, trying to process what they had witnessed and reconcile it with everything they thought they knew about human capabilities. Alex walked calmly toward the platform exit, his movements drawing every eye in the hall but generating no sound from the assembled observers. As he reached the edge of the arena, he paused and turned back toward the crowd. "Questions about the demonstration can be directed to Academy Command," he said simply, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's amplification system. "I'll be available for tactical debriefing once the medical situation has been resolved." With that, he departed, leaving behind an assembly hall full of beings who were beginning to realize that their understanding of humanity, deathworlds, and the nature of military capability might require fundamental revision. The aftermath of the 7-second demonstration sent shockwaves through every level of the Galactic Military Academy. Within hours, news of the encounter had spread beyond Station Omega to military installations throughout known space, field. Commanders, academy administrators, and government officials found themselves questioning fundamental assumptions about species capabilities and military doctrine. Dr. Sato's medical report, distributed to academy leadership within 12 hours of the incident, provided sobering details about the injuries sustained by both instructors. Commander Nix had suffered 3 fractured ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and internal bruising that would require weeks of specialized treatment. Captain Talos's condition was more serious, with critical fractures to his crystalline matrix that would need months of careful repair using advanced Zelithian medical technology. More troubling than the physical injuries, however, was the psychological impact. Both instructors showed signs of severe cognitive dissonance and trauma-related stress patterns. Their fundamental understanding of combat, strategy, and species capabilities had been shattered as completely as Captain Talos's crystalline structure. Academy. Commander Davis found herself conducting emergency briefings with senior staff, trying to address questions that no one had anticipated needing to ask. How had their intelligence assessments of human capabilities been so catastrophically wrong? What other assumptions about deathworlder species might be equally flawed? And most importantly, what did this mean for galactic military doctrine going forward? "We need to understand exactly what happened in that arena," she told her assembled department heads. "This wasn't random luck or primitive fury. What we witnessed was sophisticated combat technique applied with precision and intelligence." Professor Keeg from Behavioral Sciences looked visibly shaken as he reviewed his own pre-demonstration analyses. "Every psychological profile we developed predicted that humans would rely on emotional responses and crude aggression," he admitted. "The level of tactical sophistication demonstrated by Cadet Reed suggests our entire species assessment methodology may be fundamentally flawed." The engineering corps had already begun analyzing the demonstration recordings frame by frame, trying to understand the physics behind Alex's movements and the improvised use of environmental elements. Their preliminary findings were disturbing to anyone who believed in the technological superiority of advanced civilizations. The subject demonstrated intimate knowledge of structural engineering principles, reported Chief Engineer Kayla. His use of the platform's decorative elements as weapons required real-time calculations of mass, velocity, and trajectory that our own combat computers would need several seconds to process. "More concerning," she continued, "is his apparent ability to read and predict opponent movement patterns in real time. The positioning and timing required for his attacks suggest processing capabilities that exceed our models for organic neural networks." The cadet population was experiencing its own form of shock and readjustment. Years of conditioning about civilized superiority and primitive inferiority had been overturned in 7 seconds. Study groups formed and reformed as beings from across the galaxy tried to understand what they had witnessed. The Altarian cadets, their peaceful nature making them sensitive to the psychological implications of the demonstration, gathered in quiet circles to discuss how their understanding of violence and conflict had been challenged. Several had approached Alex directly, seeking to understand how someone could display such devastating capability while maintaining emotional equilibrium. "Your species confuses us," admitted Cadet Lyra, one of the most academically gifted Altarians. "We sense no malice or aggression in you, yet you demonstrated combat abilities that terrify beings who have studied warfare for centuries." Alex's response had been characteristically measured. "Violence and aggression are different things," he explained. "My people learned long ago that survival sometimes requires the application of force, but that doesn't mean we enjoy it or seek it out." The Centaurian cadets had approached the situation with their typical analytical methodology, running extensive computer simulations to determine how their initial assessments could have been so inaccurate. Their findings were troubling for anyone comfortable with the existing galactic hierarchy. Human neural architecture appears optimized for rapid adaptation and tactical improvisation, reported Cadet Zeta 7. Our models assumed this indicated primitive simplicity, but the demonstration suggests it actually represents a sophisticated evolutionary advantage. The betting pools that had flourished before the demonstration became a source of embarrassment for many participants. Several faculty members quietly donated their expected winnings to medical funds for the injured instructors, while others began questioning their own judgment and analytical capabilities. But perhaps the most significant change occurred among the instructor corps itself. The casual dismissal of Deathworlder capabilities that had characterized academy culture for decades suddenly seemed not just inappropriate, but dangerously naive. Commander Elena Rodriguez, a veteran instructor from the Tactical Studies Department, called for a comprehensive review of all species assessment protocols. "We've been training our officers with incomplete and potentially dangerous information," she announced during a faculty meeting. "If our understanding of human capabilities was this flawed, what other blind spots exist in our knowledge base?" The question haunted military planners throughout the galaxy. Field commanders began requesting updated intelligence assessments for all Deathworlder species, while academy curricula underwent emergency reviews to identify other potentially dangerous assumptions. 3 days after the demonstration, Academy Commander Davis requested a private meeting with Alex. The conversation took place in her office overlooking the nebula, away from the continued scrutiny and speculation that followed him. Throughout the station, "I owe you an apology," she began without preamble. "As commanding officer of this facility, I should have intervened earlier to prevent the harassment you experienced. The behavior you endured was unprofessional and unacceptable." Alex nodded. Acknowledgement, but didn't interrupt as she continued. "I also need to understand what we witnessed," she said. "That wasn't the primitive aggression described in our species databases. What you demonstrated was sophisticated military technique, applied with remarkable precision. My species has been fighting for survival since we first stood upright," Alex replied. "We've had to develop capabilities that more peaceful civilizations never needed. The techniques I used aren't secret or special. They're simply the product of necessity and adaptation." Commander Davis leaned forward, her expression serious. "Help me understand the implications," she said. "What does this mean for galactic military doctrine? How should we be incorporating human capabilities into our strategic planning?" Alex considered the question carefully. "Humans work best as force multipliers," he explained. "We're not superior warriors, but we approach problems differently than species that developed in more stable environments. We see solutions that others might miss because we're used to working with limited resources and impossible odds. The galaxy's military doctrine assumes that conflicts will be resolved through technological superiority and careful planning," he continued. "But what happens when you face opponents who don't follow conventional patterns? When your advanced technology fails or your careful plans encounter unexpected variables?" The implications were sobering. Galactic civilization had grown comfortable with its technological advantages and sophisticated strategic doctrines. The possibility of facing enemies who could adapt and improvise in real time challenged fundamental assumptions about how wars were fought and won. Over the following weeks, changes began rippling through the academy and beyond. New courses were introduced covering adaptive tactics and unconventional warfare. Species assessment protocols underwent complete revision, and exchange programs with Deathworlder academies were established to provide broader perspective on military capabilities. Alex found himself in the unexpected position of becoming a sought-after study partner. Cadets from across the galaxy approached him seeking to understand human tactical thinking and problem-solving methodologies. Study groups that had once excluded him now competed for his participation. "We've been thinking about warfare like a chess game," explained Cadet Delta Prime, a Centaurian who had become one of Alex's most frequent study partners. "Predictable moves, calculable outcomes, logical progressions, but you approach it like—" He paused, searching for the right analogy. "Like survival," Alex finished. "Because that's what it is. Chess assumes both players follow the same rules, but real combat is about adapting to whatever rules your opponent creates." The injured instructors eventually returned to duty, though both Captain Talos and Commander Nix found their perspectives fundamentally altered by their experience. They quietly requested transfers to research positions where they could study comparative military doctrine without direct interaction with cadets. Their replacements approached instruction with considerably more humility and respect for the diverse capabilities represented among their students. The casual dismissal of Deathworlder species that had characterized previous academy culture disappeared almost overnight. 6 months after the demonstration, Alex graduated at the top of his class with honors in tactical innovation and adaptive strategy. His thesis on unconventional warfare became required reading throughout the galactic military establishment, and several star systems specifically requested human advisors for their defense planning. But perhaps the most meaningful change was reflected in the Academy's new motto, carved into the main entrance where every cadet would see it daily. "Strength comes not from the absence of struggle, but from the wisdom gained through survival." The galaxy had learned that peaceful evolution and violent adaptation could both produce remarkable capabilities, and that true military excellence required understanding and respecting the full spectrum of survival strategies developed by different species under different conditions. Alex's demonstration had lasted only 7 seconds, but its impact would influence galactic military thinking for generations to come. The Deathworlds that had once been dismissed as sources of primitive cannon fodder were now recognized as training grounds for some of the most adaptable and innovative military minds in known space. And somewhere in the Academy's medical files, Dr. Sato's final report on the incident concluded with a simple observation that would be quoted in military academies across the galaxy. "Never underestimate a species that learned to thrive where others could not survive."